I think it can be easy to forget that Lauryn Hill has only put out one solo album because that album has had an unbelievable impact. The Miseducation of Lauryn Hill changed music. Today on the podcast, how the miseducation became a part of the foundation of hip-hop. I'm Elamin Abdelmahmoud. This is Commotion. I hope you don't mind that we start with this. You don't mind. I know you don't mind. I know you don't mind because what a way to start the day. That is a bit of X Factor from Lauryn Hill's album, The Miseducation of Lauryn Hill. I say her album because it's the only one. It is the only solo album that she's ever put out. It came out 25 years ago, and Lauryn is on tour right now with her old bandmates from the Fugees to celebrate. She is going to be playing in Vancouver this coming weekend. Now, when I say The Miseducation of Lauryn Hill is one of the greatest hip-hop albums of all time, that's not an exaggeration. Honestly, it kind of feels like a little bit of an understatement. I spoke with eHarmony about the making of this record and how it came to be, but we had to start a little before her solo debut with this song from the Fugees album, The Score.
Strumming my pain with his finger, singing my life with his words, killing me softly with his song, killing me softly with his...
Harmony, I swear to God, that's the only time that you see the club turn into a choir, right? Like, we all know the runs at the end of the song. This is Lauryn, she's doing Killing Me Softly. This is from The Score. How many people talk about this song as like this big breakthrough for Lauryn Hill? Can you just explain what makes it so exceptional?
Yeah. Killing Me Softly is a huge redemption story in a lot of ways, and not just for Lauryn, not just for the Fugees, but even going back into time to Lori Lieberman, who wrote the song. She was embroiled in an affair with one of the composers, and the fallout from that led to her not getting her just due and getting her fair credit for that song. She released it in the early 70s. It barely made a wave. It didn't chart at all. And then here comes Roberta Flack a couple years later. She covers the song. It blows up, and everybody remembers that as Roberta's song. So Roberta kind of cements this song in time, but then here comes this scrappy trio from Jersey who was reeling from the absolute flop of their first album. Didn't chart, kind of the same history as Lori Lieberman. It should have ended their career. And then they came back with The Score. They came back with Killing Me Softly. And here comes Lauryn just shining on this song. And her voice adds this sweetness, that touch of gospel. You were talking about the club turning into a choir. She adds that, and she makes the song pop, and she makes it crossover, and it's a hip hop track because it's got that thumping hip hop beat in the background, but it's just as much R&B, it's just as much soul, it's just as much pop. It does well in all of those markets. It wins an R&B Grammy, and it keeps the song alive long enough for Lori Lieberman to actually get her flowers. It's this beautiful redemption moment for everybody involved, and it's thanks to Lauryn and that voice.
Harmony, I'm stuck on that phrase you used, "Here comes Lauryn," because in many ways it's like nobody saw that coming. Nobody saw this woman coming. Take us back to the 90s. Take us back to 90s hip hop and that landscape. What was Lauryn up against in terms of making her first solo album?
Yeah. So hip hop in the 90s was very much a boys' club. It was steeped in misogyny. There were a lot of women MCs in the game at the time, but everybody had to have like a male chaperone in order to be taken seriously. So if you think about Foxy Brown, there was Jay-Z right behind her. If you think about Lil' Kim, there was Biggie right behind her. Yo-Yo had Ice Cube behind her. It's like every man in the industry had this like pet woman or a protege that he was kind of parading around as his success. And here's the way that her success can be attributed to me somehow. And it seemed as though you couldn't be taken seriously in the industry if you didn't have a male beside you. Even Lauryn with the Fugees had her two kind of male chaperones who were able to take credit for her success. So she now wants to make a solo album, and she now wants to show people that, no, I am an artist and I've got something to say. I've got a voice in my own story outside of the male male lens. And in 90s hip hop, that was unheard of.
Harmony, there's like a reclamation to be done of all those women to be untangled from those men. Because I'm like, I don't want to think about Foxy with Jay.
Exactly.
I don't want to think about Adina and Dre. You know what I mean? I want to think about the stuff that they accomplished. But that's a whole other conversation. I could have so many conversations with you at any moment of the day. Listen, maybe let's contextualize some stuff about the Fugees. Okay, they won Rap Album of the Year at the Grammys. And then things start to go south. What was going on?
Oh man, so much was going on behind the scenes. Again, they kind of had to pull themselves out of the trenches, and now they're getting all of this success from the score, and it's starting to go to people's heads. There's egos at play. There were rumors that Lauryn and Wyclef, two of the bandmates, were embroiled in an affair of their own. Wyclef was married at the time. Lauryn got pregnant, and mind you, she's only 20 years old at the time. Wyclef thinks the baby is his. It turns out to not be his, and there's some feelings there as well. Wyclef and Pras start doing their own solo work, and Lauryn wants her shot at doing the same, but who knows, maybe because of emotions around the pregnancy and the relationship between Wyclef and Lauryn, she's like blacklisted from the industry. Wyclef makes certain that nobody wants to work with her. She contributed a lot to his album, The Carnival, but then when it came time to do the same for Lauryn, nobody wanted to work with her, and there were a lot of intense emotions behind the scenes that led to the rupture of the Fugees.
Well, the thing that people forget is that like Lauryn was in her early 20s.
Yeah.
Like she was so young. Okay, so she's young. She's secretly dating Rohan Marley at this point. They're expecting their first kid. Her pregnancy is outed on live interview radio by Wendy Williams. Like, what? What do you remember about the reaction to the revelation of the pregnancy?
It was really sad, actually. There were lots of snarky reactions. I remember this interview that Lauryn did with MTV where she was kind of ambushed. It was like a streeter interview. And the interviewer comes up to her and says, "Are you with child? Is it true?" And kind of put Lauryn on the spot. There were people calling into Wendy's show urging that Lauryn abort the baby because she's just at the beginning of her career. The Fugees just saw this great success, and a lot of people painted her pregnancy as something that could derail her. So a lot of strangers forming strong opinions about what was happening with Lauryn at the time. And again, she's so young. This is her first pregnancy. There's a lot going on in her life. So I'm sure it was a lot to carry.
She ends up writing this beautiful anthem to motherhood about her son Zion. Actually, let's listen to a bit of it.
From the perils that will surely come. See, life for you, my prince, has just begun. And I thank you for choosing me to come through unto life to be a beautiful reflection of...
Harmony, are we going to cry on the radio? We might.
I was feeling it welling up. I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't keep the tears in. Even though that song is 25 years old now, Zion has kids of his own, but it still feels so raw and so fresh. And it's really pulling the tears out of me now.
What comes up for you when you hear it?
It's interesting. I get this visual of Lauryn being in a room by herself, pregnant Lauryn, kind of in a room with nothing else in it. And I can see like all of her critics, all of her haters on the other side of the door of that room, kind of banging on the door and yelling their opinions about what she should do with this baby and talking about, her and hurling all of their insults at her. But she's in this room. It's just her and her pregnant belly. And she's singing this beautiful, intimate love song to her son. That's the picture that I get in my mind. And that's exactly what this song sounds like to me. It's a love song to her child. It's like, look, this is what I'm going through, and people are telling me that this is not the right thing to do, but this is about you and I, and you are the joy of my world. It is such a gorgeous, gorgeous tribute to her son.
First, Lauryn makes me cry. Now you're going to make me cry? Like, what is this? What is this, Harmony?
Right? I know, the emotions.
It's the emotions. You know what? Based on those emotions, let's slightly switch gears and let's listen to this.
Now, Lauryn is only human. Don't think I haven't been through the same predicament. Let it sit inside your head like a million women in Philly pen. It's silly when girls sell their souls because it's sin. Look at where you be in. Hair weaves like Europeans. Fake nails done by Koreans. Come again. Yo, a win-win, come again.
Harmony, Lauren performed this song recently in Toronto, and she introduced it by telling the story about being obsessed with her parents and their vinyl records as a kid. She listened to all this Motown music, the Supremes, the Temptations, Gladys Knights, and the Pips. She said she wanted to capture the generational sound to kind of bring it to this new modern audience. How is music history a part of the DNA of this album, The Miseducation?
You can hear that influence all throughout The Miseducation. It is very much a hip hop album, but there are blends of that Motown sound, of R&B, of jazz. There's a bit of poetry in it. There's that roots reggae and that kind of Jamaican chant that's woven into it as well. And it's all so authentic and all so Lauryn. And you can hear kind of the history, the tapestry that kind of made her. You can see that little Lauryn kind of sitting and flipping through Motown records. You can hear that in Doo-Wop That Thing. So all throughout the record, she certainly pays homage to all of the music that helped to shape her and shape her sound, but she owns it all and makes it her own.
You know what? Let's do another one. Here's a club banger. Here's Lost Ones.
L been this way since creation. A groupie call you far from temptation. Now you want ball over separation. Tarnish my image in the conversation. Who you gonna scrimmage like you the champion? You might win some, but you just lost one. You might win some, but you just lost one. You might win some, but you just lost one.
Come on. If you didn't have a horse in the race, you hear the song, you go like, oh, I'm on her side. Whoever she's mad at. This is one of the greatest diss tracks of all time.
Of course.
Who is she mad at? Who's she mad at in this song?
She was so certainly taking shots at her bandmates in the Fugees. And again, we talked earlier about all of the drama that was happening behind the scenes between her and Wyclef, between her and Pras. There was creative battles there. There were also personal battles there, and she let it all out on this record. She was also throwing shots at, the industry, all these people who had things to say about her. And I'm sure there was a lot of, you need those two men in order to succeed. You'd be nothing without them. And this was just her kind of throwing it all against the wall. Like, look, this is me and you guys are going to listen. What I love about this song is the juxtaposition between this song and sweet songs like To Zion, where she can show like the softness and the sweetness, but then she was tough on this one, and I loved it.
I do not want to catch those hands. I do not want to catch those words. That is not
no smoke. Didn't want any smoke. None
of the smoke whatsoever. I will say, it's a song that like when you're listening to, you can imagine somebody's whole crew banging on the door, being like, "Yes, we are here to back you." But the wild thing about this is like she recorded it in Jamaica, right?
Yeah, yep, she did. So a lot of this album was recorded between New York and Jamaica, and kind of the path to Jamaica. She was dating Rohan Marley, of Bob Marley's family, but she was in New York and kind of on the receiving end of a lot of criticism, and there was a lot of drama swirling around her, and she just needed to escape. And so she went to Jamaica, and she's surrounded by the Marley family, and she talks about recording this song and having the Marleys in the room, kind of chanting and kind of like egging her on as she was writing the song. And you kind of hear that in the track. It does sound a bit like a posse cut. There's like a crowd behind her kind of echoing her hardest lines.
I'll tell you what's a relief to me, Harmony, is that this is not the case where, 25 years later we sit around and go like, oh, that album was actually quite influential and it's finally getting its flowers. Like, this was a huge hit when it came out. It is credited as the first hip hop album to win the Grammy for Album of the Year. How do you look back on that moment of its sort of crowning now?
That moment was huge. And I remember her acceptance speech. She even kind of felt a little flabbergasted. I love that Whitney Houston was the one to give her or present this Grammy to her. And you can see Whitney's excitement because she understood the size of this moment, the magnitude of that moment. Lauryn got on stage and she said, "Oh, you don't understand. This is hip hop music." Like, she knew that she was setting a precedent. Mm-hmm. It was huge. It paved the way for so many artists after her, and especially for a woman to do that in the boys club era of hip hop, for it to blend so many genres together, and for her to be so frank and honest and talk about things that people didn't want to talk about, like her unwed pregnancy at such a young age, or throwing shots shots at her old bandmates. Like, she was so frank and honest on that record, and people accepted it. They loved it, and they gave it the flowers that it deserved. So it was a huge moment back then and now. I'd
love to imagine that, like, everyone who was involved in making this record was like, oh, we did it, everybody.
Yeah.
What a fantastic moment. But it got messy, right? Like, there were 4 musicians who claimed that she didn't credit them properly for producing and for writing on this album. How did that end up playing out?
So they ended up settling that argument out of court, but not without backlash. There were even other musicians who threw shots at Lauryn and talked about her stealing the music, etc. And she actually had to come out in defense of herself and say, look, this was my vision. It was my direction. And people may have given me tips on how to execute that, but this was all me. She had to end up defending her work. But they settled out of court in the end for that one.
Here's the part that is the most frustrating to me, most frustrating to so many people. Lauryn Hill made one of the greatest albums of all time, and then she was like, actually, I'm out. She never made another album. What has she told us about why that is?
She talks a lot about the pressure to follow that album up. And I completely understand it. Like, don't forget, I was an MC myself at some point, Elamin. So I completely understand, like, writing a song and putting all of your guts into it. And it's really great. But then people... It's natural that people want more, but when you think of the cocktail of circumstances that led to that album, there was her beef with the Fugees, there was her really wanting to have a solo platform, and she had something to say. She was pregnant, and she talks about how creative she felt when she was pregnant. She had a nice quote in an interview that said something along the lines of, you know, when other people are pregnant, their nails and their hair grow and their skin glows, but for me, my mind expanded, and I felt so creative in that moment. And, you know, she was dating Rohan at the time, and she's in Jamaica. Like, there are so many things that had to come together for the Miseducation to be what it became. And she certainly wasn't doing it for the accolades or the awards. That stuff came after. It was just a moment for her to say what she wanted to say. It was like a diary entry almost. And for her to put all of that work into that album and then have people say, okay, great, boom, make another one. Like, you can't just manufacture that circumstance all over again. So I think she was feeling the pressure to follow up, but it's like, how can you possibly let all of those stars align in the exact precise location that they were the first time in order to just spit another one of those out? So yeah, I get where she's coming from, but she felt a lot of pressure.
I get it. The pressure is a lot. I get it, but it's been 25 years. Like, it's one thing to say, like, I can't put out another one of those albums, you know, 2 years later, 5 years later. 25 years later, I'll take anything, Lauryn. I'll just take you just humming on a beat. You know what I mean? Anyway, I don't know. Where are you at with this? Are you like, I've resigned myself to not getting another Lauryn record kind of situation?
I came to that conclusion many years ago. I think maybe 10th like, anniversary. I was like, okay, this is all we're going to get. And you know what? It still plays well today, and I'm okay with... I would rather get a great album like The Miseducation than have her try to force another one of those, because you can always tell when it's forced. You can always tell when it's not genuine. So disappointed, the fan in me is sad that we'll never get another. But I mean, we have this one and it still plays well today. And maybe that's all we need from her.
Listen, Lauryn Hill was a trailblazer in so many ways. The writer Michaela Angela Davis described her in this way. Lauryn broke through to gain mainstream acceptance in a way that never discounted or altered her blackness. What do you make of that statement?
I think it's a fair assessment. Not only was Lauryn successful, but she was successful being herself authentically. She was a dark-skinned woman with natural hair who was talking about topics that were controversial that people didn't want to touch, and she didn't shy away from those things. She didn't dilute those things or soften them to make them more palatable, and she was accepted. I think it's important that she got the recognition that she got for Miseducation, but it's important the state that she was in when she received those accolades. Like, she didn't bend over to please the industry in any way. She didn't try to soften her edges. She gave herself authentically, and to be celebrated for being yourself is quite an accomplishment.
Harmony, it should always be illegal for me to stop talking to you because I want to keep doing it for the end of time. But I got one more question for you, because I really do think we could talk about this for hours, but maybe we should leave it here. When we think about how this album and how Lauryn shows up in the work of contemporary artists, I think of Lauryn as someone who looms so large in the imagination of so many artists who reference her all the time, who reference either her music or just like her ideology or the energy that she brought to hip hop. So what do you make of the way that she has sort of permeated through the DNA of hip hop itself?
Exactly. I agree with your assessment. Her finger remains on the pulse of the entire genre. Her influence, like you said, looms above it. And even outside of the genre, like this album transcends genre, it transcends race, gender. There are so many people who cite her as influences, from Solange Knowles, who talks about miseducation kind of setting the foundation for a seat at the table. Or there's Childish Gambino, who blends melody and rap quite the same way that Lauryn did. Adele even cites it as an influence. Rihanna does. Rihanna has that same kind of unapologetic demeanor, and so does Adele. Like, think of some of Adele's music. Like, everybody has taken something from Lauryn, whether or not they realize it. And that album has a lasting impact in so many ways, whether it's people just being unapologetic, being who they are and just telling their true story, unedited and raw and uncut, whether it's incorporating that melody and kind of juxtaposing the sweetness and the hardness on one album, the way that Rihanna does. Like, everyone has taken something from that album. It is cemented in time. It was foundational. And no one can ever take that away from Lauryn Hill.
I'll tell you what else Rihanna's taken from it is this incredibly long wait between albums.
I know.
Riri, where are you at,
I've arrived at the conclusion we're not getting another one. Lauryn taught me how to brace myself for that pain. So, yeah.
Harmony, I appreciate you. I always appreciate talking to you. Thank you so much for your time. You're the best.
Thanks so much.
Of course.
You said you'd be there for me, cry for me. You said you'd die for me, give to me, give to me. Why won't you live for me, care for me, care for me? You said you care for me, there for me, care for me. Said you'd be there for me, cry for me. You said you'd die for me, give to me, give to me.
A Harmony is a music critic and industry insider. I loved that conversation with Lauryn Hill. The Miseducation of Lauryn Hill is the 25th anniversary tour is happening right now, and it stops at the Rogers Arena in Vancouver this Sunday. My name is Elamin Abdelmahmoud. This is Commotion. Let me tell you about Katie Hessel. Okay, Katie Hessel has dedicated her career to challenging all the ways that women have been written out of art history. First, she started doing this through an Instagram account that she called The Great Women Artists. Then she ended up launching a podcast that has the same name. And now she's got a new book, and her new book is called The Story of Art Without Men. Katie, in that book, documents like 500 years of women artists, their lives, and how their work has influenced the world. This evening, Katie is giving a talk about this at the National Gallery of Canada in Ottawa. So I got a chance to talk to Katie about some of her favorite artists, also the role of museums in all of this, and the pretty ingenious ways that some of these artists made sure that they wouldn't be erased from history. But first, Katie told me about why she called her book The Story of Art Without Men.
So when I was growing up, I loved a book called The Story of Art by E.H. Gombrich. In America and Canada, I think you have Jansen, which is kind of the introductory Bible to art history. It was my go-to. It was full of pictures, full of beautiful prose. And when I was installing a giant 10-meter high timeline in the middle of Tate Modern, as one does, of women artists for the last 1,000 years, I actually went to my Story of Art copy because he had a great timeline at the back. And I looked it up for research purposes, and I realized that there wasn't a single woman artist. Wow. And I looked and looked and looked, and I couldn't believe it. And I thought, wait, hang on a second. Have I almost been cheated looking at this book for the last, however 15 years it was when I looked at it? And then I realized that the story of art was essentially the story of art without women. So I thought I'd correct that by writing the story of art without men.
Well, I was going to say something that I really enjoyed learning in your book was about how some of these women noticed the erasure happening around them and they prevented the erasure through their own work. Can we talk about Clara Peters for a moment and why she did what she did? And let's explain what she did.
Totally. Okay, so Clara Peters was an extraordinary artist, and she was around in the early 1600s in Northern Europe. And women were often sort of restricted, as you will, to still life and portraiture. But so often the time, because there weren't many sort of female gatekeepers or, patrons or whatever to really make sure that these women weren't forgotten, oftentimes women's art got misattributed as the kind of history went on. And so what they did really cleverly with Clara Peters did, she's known for her still lives that are meticulously rendered, these sort of delectable spreads all spread out with goblets and chains and shells and everything. But then you look closely at her work and often try to catch a glimmer in her work. What is revealed is actually sometimes up to 12 self-portraits in miniature form within the still life.
As a reflection or something,
As a reflection, exactly. So sometimes at the artist at work, exactly. So it's the kind of thing where actually women artists almost had to write themselves physically into their paintings, even though they were dealing with a subject that wasn't necessarily portraiture, because so oftentimes, especially in the 19th century, art dealers would actually scratch out a woman's name and replace it with her male contemporary because they sold much better.
So I think that is the kind of erasure that I thought I was going to read about in the book, right? I expected to read about how societies in the 1500s, 1600s didn't allow women to make art. But what I didn't expect was the women who were recognized and actually celebrated in their time, but then history books were written and they never made it into the history books. It made me think about the kind of erasure that institutions allow now.
Completely. I mean, I think it's almost thanks to the internet that we're having this sort of overhaul of addressing of different communities that have been erased and left out of history. There is this sort of glaring absence. And what do you do with that absence? You need to fill it. We need everyone from all different backgrounds and communities to take part of this subject so we can make sure that everyone's story is represented. But it's so interesting you should say that, because I think of an artist, someone like Artemisia Gentileschi, who was an extraordinary Roman Baroque artist working at the cusp of the 17th century, actually around the same time as Clara Peters. And she, already from age 17, she made towering paintings of Susanna and the Elders, which was a very popular story because it allowed for the semi-naked Susanna. It was a story from the Old Testament, the book of Daniel. But what she did, she really gave voice to Susanna. Instead of sort of sexualizing her and idealizing the woman, she actually showed the kind of anguish and tension this woman felt while she was sort of being almost spied on by these lecherous older men. And I should mention that Artemisia Gentileschi was able to take on works like this because her father was an artist. And so oftentimes it was thanks to if you had a father or an artist husband whose work you could copy to then create these sort of grand pictures. But Artemisia Gentileschi was a celebrity in her lifetime. She moved to Florence at about 1612, 1613. And after she suffered a very traumatic sexual abuse incident with a friend of her artist father's, and she kind of sort of restarted her life in Florence, and she became a sensation, always sort of profiling the heroines from the Bible in this way that was extraordinary. She gives voice to the woman in the 17th century. I feel seen by her 400 years on. But, she was such a celebrity that people would actually commission works of her hand because it had this such divine-like essence. She worked all over Europe. She traveled around Italy. She was even at the court of Charles I in the 1630s in England, a huge feat for a woman at that time. But where was she in my art history education when I was growing up? If I had seen someone like that, I would have thought, yeah, it's possible to speak out like that. It's possible to be an artist. It's possible to assert your presence.
I think listening to you talk about all these artists, it's important to point out to people that it's really important for you to see these works in person. You did an interview back in June where you said you went to the Met 9 times in 5 weeks while you were in New York. Katie, I got to tell you.
Why did I say that? I love it. I mean, it's true. It's true, but I can't believe I'm blasting that. That's great.
Well, look, there's many people who've lived in New York their whole lives and they've never not been to the Met once, let alone twice, and you went to the Met 9 times in 5 weeks. You told me when we started this conversation that you've already been to 2 museums today. It is the middle of the day, Katie.
It's not even lunchtime, yeah.
Well, let's talk about this. Let's talk about how much of your life is dedicated to going to museums.
Museums are they're the leading cultural institutions of the world, and they should be places where debate happens. They are places where discussion should be had. The whole point of artworks for me, I mean, first of all, I love art history because it traces the history of the world through not just images, but the individuals who made them and what spurred them on to make that work. What story are they telling us? And then when you put them in dialogue in a museum, what does that create? There is no right or wrong answer when you look at an artwork. And I think it's so important, only this morning I was at the Brooklyn Museum, and the Brooklyn Museum, it's this kind of neoclassical temple-like facade. What does that tell me about it? What does that tell me about the history of the world and actually the contents inside? Similarly with the National Gallery in London, the National Gallery is this neoclassical temple. But just if I look at the collection of the National Gallery in London, just 1% of it is devoted to women artists, which is shocking and abominable. Similarly, the Royal Academy of Arts in London, it's been around for 254 years. And only now, in 2023, are they having their first ever solo exhibition by a female artist in their main gallery. So while museums are places of debate and discussion and should invite everyone, there's also this underlying tension that they haven't always done that in the past. The Royal Academy of Arts has never had a female director. Is there a sort of correlation between the fact there's never been a female artist solo exhibition until now? Maybe, because also we can't have the same people in charge of every single cultural institution because we need different perspectives. And the more that's happening right now, we've got women who are head of the Louvre, the Tate, the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. More women are in these powerful positions than ever. And that is changing things. Things change from the top down.
Hey, you mentioned earlier that you were at the Brooklyn Museum earlier today. Back in June, we covered Hannah Gadsby's Picasso exhibition at the Brooklyn Museum. She critiqued Picasso in that exhibition. The exhibition also featured a bunch of paintings by lesser-known women artists. It received a lot of backlash and a lot of conversations, a lot of reviews. I know you weren't able to see it in person, but how do you think an exhibit like this fits into what we're talking about today?
Well, I think, it's the fact that something like this is still shocking. The fact that someone's calling out Picasso. I mean, it's so interesting. Like that just this morning as well, I was at the New Museum where Judy Chicago was exhibiting a show called Her Story. And on the top floor, she includes all these works by all these different women artists to almost put herself in dialogue with that as well. And I thought, my God, this is groundbreaking. But how is this groundbreaking? Why am I still so moved to see this on such a rare occasion, all these artists come together. Yeah. And what I realize is that when I'm, going to the Met 9 times, I am often seeing the same painting again and again and again, or the same perspective. And really, it's thanks to, people can say what they want about the Hannah Gadsby show. It's problematic. But in a way, it got people thinking and it got people going to that show as well. And I think, again, like I said, it's art. You don't have to like it. And actually, it's good to have an issue with it because actually that fuels debate and can speak to something larger in society.
Katie, before I let you go, you write a column for The Guardian where you talk about artwork that is made by women that speaks to our current moment. What is an artwork that we should know about that speaks to the moment that we're in right now?
So actually, just this morning, I was thinking about at the Judy Chicago exhibition, what if women ruled the world? It's these amazing tapestries that she made that just says, what if women ruled the world? And it's a question, even though it's sort of embellished in this gold thread, that is so interesting. We are living in a time of conflict. We're living in a very complex time. And we have to really think about different perspectives here. Also, for my Guardian column last week, with all the troubles that are going on in the world right now, I think art can't be where we go for the answers to things, but it can actually show the deep rawness of human suffering. So, I look at someone like Kata Kollwitz, who's a German expressionist, her work, Woman with Dead Child from 1903, of this woman who is holding onto her dead child. Almost you feel her cries seeping into the chest of her dead child. And it's just heartbreaking. And we think, the news right now, it's difficult to comprehend everything that's going on in the world. There is so much happening. Sometimes headlines, they can be so ubiquitous that we sort of, not become numb to things. But how do we understand the kind of rawness of that? And then how can we do our bit? And actually art can show us that empathy. It can give us empathy. And I think it's important, again, to say, what if women ruled the world? Would there be less suffering? Would there be this? And I think it's a question we should all ask ourselves. How would we run the world? And that's what I think art can help guide me do.
Katie, I appreciate your time so much. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. It was great to chat.
That was Katie Hessel. She's an art historian, writer, and the host of the podcast, The Great Women Artists. Tonight, she's at the National Gallery of Canada in Ottawa. She's going to be talking about her new book, The Story of Art Without Men. That is it for the podcast today. Hey, listen, remember, you can listen to any episode of this show wherever you get your podcasts. Can you also do me a favor? Can you follow us on Instagram? Our Instagram is at Commotion CBC. If you follow us, you get a bunch of videos of some of our favorite conversations. My name is Elamin Abdelmahmoud. Hey, I hope you had a good journey with us. We'll talk to you soon.